Metroid Dread first turned up as a rumor in 2005. It even got a name drop in a terminal in Metroid Prime 3. In many ways, the Metroid Dread of 2021 feels like that 2D-ish Metroid game we should have gotten 16 years ago when the Metroid series was, please forgive me here, in its prime. It's not often that we get to say this about a game that finally emerges from development purgatory, but the wait has been worth it. The epic delay allows Metroid Dread to use the Switch's power to greatly improve upon what could have been accomplished on previous systems, and makes the supposed conclusion to Metroid's mainline story a grand finale. Everything works in handheld form, but you really have to dock the system to get the full experience. Playing on a big HD screen reveals sprawling alien scenes and diorama-like backgrounds, lit by the dynamic glow of Samus's arsenal and projectiles. Also, thanks to the Switch, the action never seems to drop a frame. That's important, since combat is lightning fast, and it just keeps getting faster with each power-up, which in turn is great, because it reduces the backtracking time as you blast through fodder, and later lets you make incredibly short work of once powerful enemies. It reminds me that one issue I had with Samus Returns on 3DS was the cramped controls hindering the new twitchy combat. Here on the Switch, it's much more comfortable, and more fun. The counter system from Samus Returns, which requires careful timing to react to visual cues from enemies foreshadowing their attacks, is just one of many moves including dashes, feints, dodges, and timed charge attacks that make up your arsenal. It's a lot of buttons, and the Pro Controller is really your best option. If I had to beat a boss, I docked every time. On that note, these are some of the best boss fights I've ever played in any action platformer. They seemed impossible at first, but post-victory, I felt like they'd made me a better player. The EMMI or EMMI encounters are less what you'd think of as boss fights and more akin to stealth missions, and sometimes a manic race to the finish line if you were spotted. Regions of the map are essentially one-hit kill zones, which makes another new to Metroid feature of Dread, which happens just outside these zones, extremely welcome. One aspect of boss fights that I'm not too keen on, however, is the use of counters as QuickTime events. In some fights, it seems like shooting a boss hardly matters while you dodge and await the next move you can counter. I would like to be able to use my 200-some stock of missiles to just destroy a boss the old-fashioned way. Isn't that why I'm collecting all those missile expansions in the first place? Speaking of collectibles, the many ways missile tanks and other upgrades are hidden is exquisite in Metroid Dread. There are some truly inscrutable puzzles that left me thinking about solutions even between play sessions, and going for a 100% run is a great way to experience the intricate way this world is put together. If you aren't a completionist, you can choose to shoot through Metroid Dread in a shorter burst. According to the game log, I spent 11 hours on my first run, reaching 82% completion. But that figure clearly excludes pause screens, which you might spend a lot of time on, because the map itself has been overhauled, and sometimes studying it is the only clue you'll have for your next step. I suspect many will turn to a strategy guide for this, since Metroid Dread does little to direct you to your next objective. But I like this change, as a general opponent of hand-holdy waypoints, and especially in a game that emphasizes probing every block. The map, and really the world itself, isn't static. It goes through some pretty interesting changes, increasing the strength of enemies and altering access to areas. I won't spoil the late game tricks for you, but while they aren't Castlevania Symphony of the Night's Upside Down Castle, they are quite cool. I'm not sure I needed another length of game added onto the end of this one anyway. Dread gets the pacing right, ramping up the speed at which you get new tools and access new map areas to something of a fever pitch. It's up to you to pick a point, take a breath, and backtrack if you'd like. Otherwise, you can power through to the end, though I would not recommend it. Nintendo has touted Dread as the final chapter of at least one Metroid storyline, and whatever you're thinking that means, it's crazier! Despite the twistier elements of the plot, there's one series peak moment when Samus does something completely unexpected. It's subtle, and I can't wait for fans to experience it. That subtlety extends to much of the story as well. There isn't a lot to it. A bounty hunter, a bunch of innocent but very hungry aliens, and of course a new reason for how you lost all your great weapons and equipment. I found it refreshing that, whereas games like Other M went way too far in building out the world of Metroid and ended up with some pretty awkward results, Dread shuts that world out, focuses on hunting and being hunted. The sparse story and setting that runs you through subterranean oceans, jungles, laboratories, and ruins is a much better match for that classic Metroid feel. Metroid Dread gets so much right after so many years that I'm almost resentful that we didn't get the same game and a few sequels starting back in 2005. But instead, I'm incredibly happy to play a Metroid that is back at the top of its game. Even though it's the latest in a decades-old series, Dread has just enough clever innovation to balance its familiarity. The universally recognizable mix of tough puzzles, tougher boss fights, ever-evolving exploration options, and intricate level design that recent games like Hollow Knight and Ori get so right has an origin point. It's Metroid. I love those games, but the Metroid team, a mix of old and new developers now, have shown that they know how to do it best. For more from Nintendo, check out our reviews of the Switch OLED model and WarioWare. Get it together. And for everything else, stick with IGN.